Hey guys, Quiv the Lazy Geek here and welcome back to the channel. I am super excited because today I get to unbox and, well, once the clouds clear, because of course I received new equipment so the clouds aren't cleared, but I get to unbox and test a telescope that I think and I hope is going to be a game changer for the hobby. This telescope is in this box here. It comes from Apertura, and when I saw this telescope, I thought I absolutely need to get my hands on it, so I was ready to just buy it from the United States and get it shipped here to Japan. Just in case, I contacted Apertura and, well, they just sent me this complimentary copy, so I didn't have to buy it. Be aware of that. That said, I have not unboxed it yet, so I'm going to show you what is in this package, and I'll discover it together with you at the start of this video. And later on, hopefully, fingers crossed, because the rainy season is also almost upon us, I'll be able to actually test it under the stars. Okay, so a little bit of background there. Why do I think this can be a game changer for the hobby? Well, it comes back down to several innovations that have been made in the hobby in recent years that effectively makes, hopefully, the advice that beginners to astrophotography should get a small refractor obsolete. Because we've seen innovations like strain wave gear or harmonic drive mounts, like this one from Warp Astron, or of course the super popular ZW AM5, AM3 mounts that make using larger, heavier telescopes just as easy as smaller refractors. And we've seen also in the hobby the advent of really easy to use and or super powerful control software from things like the ESI Air, the StellarMate Pro, or Nina or Voyager, or other software as well to make controlling all of your equipment a breeze. And the last piece that was missing to basically making this advice, you need a small refractor to start astrophotography, obsolete, was a Newtonian telescope that you could use as a beginner out of the box. And this, I hope, is it. This is the Apertura CarbonStar 150. It is a 150 millimeters aperture Newtonian telescope. So it's very similar to what I have behind me, which is the Skywatcher Quattro 150p. But if you've watched my videos, you've seen how much pain I had to set up this telescope. It's an excellent telescope once you've set it up, but I've replaced the focuser, I've replaced the spider, I've added a primary mirror mask, I've flocked the inside of the tube, I've added a dew shield. I flogged the dew shield. I added what I effectively called a butt plug to my telescope to remove light leaks. I've had to do a lot of modification. And of course, I had to spend hours getting the collimation right, because out of the box, it was almost a couple of inches off, like the secondary mirror was nowhere near where it should have been. But Apertura designed this telescope to be usable effectively out of the box. And I also had a quick talk with the Apertura guys, and they are passionate about this. They really are passionate about this mission of making a Newt that is usable by complete beginners, that will be paired very well with like the SI 533 MC Pro, with the 585 MC Pro, with like micro four thirds sensors like the 294, or at the higher end towards APS-C size sensors. And of course, I'll be testing it with APS-C size sensors. And so the idea is we get excellent optics, basically like the same optics as we get in this one, but wrapped into a mechanical package that is easy for beginners. And we also get a great user manual. This is something that is lacking for so many telescopes, including this one. I checked the user manual for this one on the website because I was so excited about getting it. It is well done. It covers all of the topics. It covers how to attach the EEF from ZW onto it. It covers how to do collimation, including, as an optional test, the final star collimation. And it covers that in very simple, easy to follow steps for beginners. So I'm very excited. Let's look at what's in the box. Okay. So we are getting hex wrenches and bolts. So this is going to be to attach dovetail plates to your telescope. You can see I've read the manual. And dovetail plates, if you're a beginner in astrophotography, they're used to connect your telescope to the mount. So you can see that green little section here on this particular telescope is a dovetail plate. And it is fitting in the dovetail saddle, that part with the knobs, that is as the part of this mount here. Okay, we also get this box, which contains in a lot of bubble wrap, a second box, which contains in some other bubble wrap, the coma corrector that's going to be used with these telescopes. Again, if you're a beginner, if you want to use a Newtonian telescope like this one for imaging, you need a coma corrector to fix basically the star shapes across your field of view for your camera sensor. And it comes provided with this particular kit. You can also buy this telescope without the coma corrector if you already have one, like a paracore, for instance, and you're an advanced astrophotographer. Talking about this, by the way, obviously I'll have all of the links down in the description, or maybe right in the description, depending on the YouTube interface you're having. YouTube is doing some weird tests right now, and also in a pinned comment. You have two SKUs of this. You have one SKU without the coma corrector, and I think it's $799 US, and then you have the other SKU with the coma corrector, and this is what I would highly recommend for any beginner, which I believe is $949 US. We also get this. This is a dovetail plate. This is actually a Losmandy type dovetail plate, very wide. And if your mount supports it, which mine does, it's recommended to use this one. And that's what I will do initially. And of course, we'll need to use the bolts to attach it to the telescope, but all of the steps are detailed in the manual. And we also have another dovetail plate, which is a Vixen style dovetail plate. You can see it is much thinner. It is actually the same style as this, this green thing here. And yeah, you can use it either instead of the Losmandy style here, or you can put it at the top of the telescope where you can use this to attach accessories to it. And we have yet another box in here, which contains rings. And those rings will be actually put around your telescope tube and then attached to the dovetail plate to mount the telescope onto your mount. So let's quickly open one up to see how it looks like. Yeah, this is high quality. The quality of these ones that come with the Quattro 150p are complete garbage in comparison. Yeah, this is good. Like I can open them fully very easily and close them and tighten that very easily. We have some nice thick felt in there as well. And of course, at the bottom of the top, we have those screw holes that will be used together with this and the dovetail plates. So let me take the telescope out, but while I was taking it out, I saw there was a paper underneath. And Apertura warned me about this. This is basically an inspection certificate. And it is not just for my scope here, it is for all of the scopes. Each one apparently gets inspected separately and collimated prior to shipment. I like that. I like that kind of stuff. When you show attention to details. And yeah, I've been on a call with those guys. Passionate is like an understatement. Okay, let's go to, it's light. That thing is light. Well, it's a carbon tube, right? So it's light. Carbon tubes is great because it has some rigidness, which is good because like this tube, for instance, it flexes, which affects the optics, which is a bad thing, etc., etc. This shouldn't be an issue with this. And here we are. Oh my word, it is so light. It looks so good. Oh my word, it is so beautiful, so light. And this is what we get. First, I see the carbon tube. It's beautiful. I see the focuser. The focuser is described in the documentation. It is a Crayford style focuser, which is again super well documented in the manual. It works via friction. It looks really well machined. It actually looks very similar to a GSO focuser. GSO is like a wholesale kind of brand, but they make high quality stuff. And I'm perfectly fine with this. Now, I don't know if it was something they forgot. For me, it seems maybe it like dropped off or something, but it did not have like this cap. I just added this cap because I wanted to close this, so it was like this. Not a big deal. But yeah, it feels very nice. And yeah, much, much better than the focuser that came with this thing here, which was this. This was the original focuser that came with the Skywatcher Quattro 150p. Garbage. Same style of focuser, but simply poorly executed, very poorly executed. Looking at this focuser, by the way, so we can see on the, there is a 1.25 inch adapter, which I will not be using. It has a compression ring. And then once I remove this, we have a proper 2-inch adapter, which is where the coma corrector will fit in. And this is actually also compression ring, which is much appreciated compared to like the Quattro 150 that simply has 2 screws that could scrape your coma corrector directly. Not the best, and also it's not the best for collimation, optical stability, mechanical stability, and all of that. So it is very good to see this. Also, what I really liked is that in the manual, they tell you like, hey, with the coma corrector, you can expect the point of best focus to be around 20 millimeters. So I could just like expand the little draw tube, look at my meter there and say like, okay, around here will be my point of best focus. So that's where I'll start when I focus my telescope. This is magnificent. It is really built for beginners. Okay, let me put that back in. I'm so hyped. I'm so hyped. I'm so hyped. This is so cool. Okay. It is what I've been hoping for since I started testing this thing that has great optics, but terrible mechanical and build quality. This is the opposite. Okay. Let's not get too excited. Let's look at the back of the telescope. We can see the back has the collimation screws, as we would expect. It also has a mirror cover to prevent light leaks. So we'll see how effective it is, because I'm in Tokyo. I get a lot of light, stray light hitting the telescope. But with this telescope here, it has huge light leaks, and you see I have my affectionately called butt plug here at the back to prevent light leaks. We'll see if it's completely unneeded with this scope, but man, is it absolutely tremendously beautiful. Now let's have a look at the front. Removing the dust cap. Oh wow. Here is the inside of the telescope. We have a beautiful telescope tube that I can see the paint inside is a good paint that does not reflect light, and it has those baffles there. So this is great to avoid stray light. And again, this is great for beginners who are living in like light polluted cities. So I don't have to do anything. I spent so much time actually painting the inside of my scope and adding like non-reflecting paper and felt paper and that kind of stuff. So very, very much appreciated to see that this work is already done. The spider that holds the secondary as well has some not so thick, but thick enough vanes that hold it onto the telescope. For reference, the spider that originally came with that one is this. It's not great. So this is much more stable, and apparently it was pre-collimated. Obviously, it's been going from the United States to Japan, so I don't expect the collimation to have held. But at first glance, the secondary mirror looks to be very well centered in the optical axis. So that's a very good sign. We'll get to it a bit more later. One small drawback that I see, I'm not sure if it's going to show on camera, is that there is a little bit of dust on the mirror. Not dust, actually. They look like paint flakes. So it's not a big deal at all, because your image quality isn't affected by that at all. But if you're a beginner, you might look at this and be like, oh, and then you want to clean the mirror, and you should never clean the mirror. So it might actually be good to leave a note in the manual saying like, hey, if you have like some tiny specks on the primary mirror, relax, it's fine, don't stress about it, don't do anything, and whatever you do, don't clean the mirror unless you absolutely really need to. And I heard that Apertura wants to make a video about the process to clean the mirror, again, in the optics of making this available to beginners. And now I blew some air on the mirror and most of those flecks are gone, so I don't really mind. Still, it would be nice to take that into account before they're shipping. Maybe those flakes got like shaken off during shipping, something that Apertura might have a look at. Okay, let's get this scope ready. So I can simply take my rings, open them, and put them around the scope. And I will space them just right so that we can have like the dovetail plate here. Actually, I'll put the dovetail plate in this direction because I like to have my focuser facing downwards towards the mount like I have here. And now I have both rings roughly placed here, and I will be aligning them with this dovetail plate here. And for that, I'll use the bolts and the hex wrenches that were provided with the telescope. So while I'm doing so, I can just unscrew, like untighten the ring slightly and just move it along the telescope tube. The felt lining makes it very easy. I can rotate and move very easily like that. So my next step is to check how is the initial collimation and to basically fine tune it, because in transportation from the USA to Japan, it must have shifted. Apertura provides instructions to using Cheshire and laser together to do collimation, laser for approximate, then Cheshire for precise collimation, and then also star test for final collimation if you are really into it. I'll be using something else, just a collimation camera called the Ocal collimator. It's basically a digital Cheshire eyepiece. If I have no idea what I'm talking about, all of those terms, they're explained in the manual if you were to buy this as a beginner to imaging Newtonian astrophotography. Okay, and looking at my electronic Cheshire, this is what I see. The collimation is actually extremely close. This is without me touching anything. Basically, ideally, you'd want like that ring of light here to be perfectly centered in the red circle that you see. And you'd want that little gray donut here to be perfectly centered with that white square. We're very, very close to that. And I expect it's going to be a couple of minutes to just adjust that very easily. And you can see this is what I get after adjusting just the secondary mirror. And as I did this, you can see that the center here is almost perfect. And this is actually the primary mirror that almost doesn't need to be adjusted. And this will be my final adjustment. It really took me a couple of minutes. And now it's perfectly collimated. It was super close to perfect collimation in the first place, despite a trip from the United States to Japan. So really, really impressed with this. So now we're basically ready to image. So what I can do is take the coma corrector / slight reducer, so it makes this f4 telescope into an f3.8 super fast imaging Newtonian, and I can attach it to my camera system. The back focus is the standard 55mm, so if you're buying like basically a ZW or like what I have here, a Taupe Tech camera, you can get that back focus very easily. And then I can simply insert that into the focuser, and it is a very tight and smooth experience. Oh, and also one of the things I did is I installed an automatic electronic focuser on the telescope. So obviously the telescope comes with instructions on how to install the ZW EF. I prefer to use my Astro Aces focuser, which I've featured on the channel before, mostly because of the cramp, where I can move the focuser manually, as well as then use the electronic focuser to do so. And I can control that via my smartphone. And yes, you can see I'm able to move the focuser very easily electronically as well. So now we're all ready to really do astrophotography with the telescope. Collimated, a focuser connected, a guide camera, the main camera. I might replace this setup with the ASI duo camera, so we don't need a separate guide camera, but I'll see. But everything's ready here for the tests. And I am so excited. This is really what I've been wanting for years. So really hyped about this. So here I have my telescope fully ready to image. I just need to mount it on here. Also, I need clear skies. So fingers crossed I get some soon. But right now, with just this onboarding and setting up, I am very impressed. The mechanics are good. The design with like the light leak prevention, the baffles inside, the collimation that was basically almost perfect from the get-go is very impressive. It is very light. The rings are really good. The tube sounds awesome. It comes with the Losmandy or Vixen plates to attach to your mount. It's a dream come true, guys. It's a dream come true. And as I mentioned, Apertura is obviously very passionate about this telescope, and they have tons of documentation where they discuss their design decisions about like why they went with primary mirror clips, why they went with that particular secondary mirror size, why they did this and that, and how it helped with like the corners of the image, etc., etc. It's fascinating and well worth a read. Again, I'll have all of the links down in the video description. Okay, and here's the setup that I've decided to test this Apertura CarbonStar telescope with. Now, before we do that, I want to take a little step back there and explain why I wish and I hope that this telescope can be a great first beginner scope, because up to now, or up to until recently, the best recommendation for beginners to astrophotography was to go with something like this, the RedCat 51, which is a small refracting telescope. Because refracting telescopes, you put them on a mount that can be slightly underpowered, and they don't have a lot of focal lengths, which means they don't zoom a lot on the targets, meaning tracking our targets. We don't need to be as demanding as with longer focal length. They're light, so they don't need very heavy-duty mounts. And their optics, in theory, work out of the box, unless you're unlucky with the Astro Lottery, and that's a big part of it. Basically, it's like a set and forget type of system, very forgiving of mistakes and very forgiving for beginners, right? But it has limitations. You're limited to very wide field images that everyone and their mother does. And if you've bought the equipment that is for this little refractor, then when you upgrade to something more, you'll need to upgrade a lot more things at the same time. Plus, you will want to upgrade. You will want to go deeper. So this is always a first step. It will stay with you, but it's very often, listen, not always, but very often just a first step to bigger optics like this one. Compared to a small refractor, a Newtonian telescope like this one has a longer focal length. So the RedCat that I showed has 250 millimeters focal length. This one has 580 millimeters focal length. And so we're zooming in twice as much as the small refractor, so we need to be twice as precise for the tracking. And of course it's also heavier than the RedCat, although with the carbon tube it's not that heavy either. But it does mean that you need a solid mount for it, and this, the mount, is where recent innovations make using a Newtonian rather than a small refractor, in my opinion, viable for beginners as well, thanks to strain wave gear, also known as harmonic drive mounts like this one. The WD-20 from Warp Astron, or the very popular ZWAM3 or ZWAM5, to which, with the color scheme, this telescope would be a perfect match for. But Newtonians, they require a little bit more. You saw me earlier collimating this telescope with a third-party accessory, which was basically an electronic Cheshire eyepiece, what we call. It's very easy once you're used to it, but it's something to learn. There's something else as well. You can have optical defects with Newtonian telescopes, but in my opinion, they're much rarer because mirrors is easier to manufacture and to mass produce. What you can still get is something like pinched optics, but pinched optics is usually related to how the primary mirror, the main large mirror at the back of this telescope, is attached to its cell. And it's extremely easy to fix. It's a matter of 5 minutes work. So you have ways to actually deal with optical issues, with not all optical issues, but with a lot of optical issues that you could find with a Newtonian. And it's a great way to learn about optics at the same time as you're doing. So anyway, going back to this setup, this is what I have. So I've added a Vixen rail at the top, so I have my Stellarmate Pro as well as my Milli Quieter 4C here to control the whole setup. It is on my harmonic or strain wave gear mount, the Warp Astron WD-20. And I'm using it with the ZW ASI 2600 MC Duo, which has a guiding chip integrated. And I have my Astroasis focuser attached to the tube that was very easy to attach as well. And the EEF from ZW is also very easy to attach. And so this is like the full setup, which is one sexy looking setup, if I may say so. I've also done some further changes. I've actually rotated the whole focuser. There's actually two tiny set screws at the bottom of the focuser plate that let you rotate the entire focuser assembly. So that's really good as well. And I've also done something else. I've tested the collimation procedure of the telescope with the tools recommended in the Apertura manual, namely a laser, a collimation laser, and a Collimation Cheshire eyepiece, like old-fashioned way. And I will say something extremely positive that I saw with this is that when I achieved perfect collimation with my laser, which normally is just an approximate collimation because of how lasers work, and then I placed my Cheshire eyepiece in the optical train, it was already the Cheshire eyepiece was fully agreeing with the laser. I had nothing else to do. And that speaks to well-centered optics and also good adapters at the focuser end of the telescope. So that was actually very positive, and I was really surprised that it was super easy to collimate with the laser, even better than the Ocal eyepiece, like that digital eyepiece that I was using earlier. And that's very, very positive because with the low quality, like low mechanical quality of other Newtonian telescopes, like the Skywatcher Quattro 150p, which is a direct equivalent to that, collimation was a nightmare, and I wasted, I'm not exaggerating, tens of hours on collimation of that scope. One thing, by the way, like small difficulty I had with this telescope was the focuser itself, which is really good, and it is a type of focuser that is called a Crayford focuser. It works via friction, which is great because it doesn't have anything called backlash, always appreciated, but you do need to, you have a thumb screw that you need to tighten very tightly, in my opinion, until you have like the proper friction to carry this like heavy camera behind it. And I feel that if I had like a filter wheel attached to this as well, I may want, rather than a thumb screw, an actual bolt that I can tighten more via a hex key, for instance. I've provided that feedback to Apertura, and they might replace the thumb screw with a thicker thumb screw that provides more leverage, so you can tighten it more, which might solve the issue for like heavier imaging trains. And so after that, I actually had one night, one single clear night for now, with a pretty bright moon, unfortunately, to test out the optics with this APS-C size sensor. Now, Apertura kept telling me like APS-C size might be a bit too optimistic, too ambitious. It's really made for micro four thirds and smaller sensors. But hey, I'm here to torture this poor telescope, so here I am. And I have results for you, so let's go inside and have a look. Okay, and so my technique has been to just do an autofocus, and then I oriented this little Newtonian telescope to the star Pollux, if I remember correctly, and then just took, I think, 10 seconds or 30 seconds exposure to just have a look at the stars across the field of view of an APS-C size sensor. And here is the result. So at first glance, it doesn't look too bad. We have the classic Newtonian spikes, and we have like kind of weird secondary spikes that I thought would be from the mirror clips, and very likely are, but it's like, if you're pixel peeping, that might be disturbing to you. I personally don't really care that much. But if we zoom in more, you can see that the stars, even in the center of the field of view, they appear slightly triangular. So yeah, there are apparently, as far as I can tell, pinched optics in the telescope, and I'll show you the image slightly out of focus as well, where it's even more obvious that we have pinched optics. Now on a Newtonian telescope, pinched optics, they're expected, especially for a telescope that was shipped from abroad, because you have three clips that hold your primary mirror in place, and you don't want the primary mirror to rattle against those clips while in shipping, so manufacturers tend to over tighten those clips. When they over tighten those clips, that actually puts pressure on the side of the mirror surface, and that deforms the mirror slightly, but enough to actually have an impact on our images, and that's where pinched optics are. So when I saw that, I immediately knew that, okay, we have pinched optics, so I should remove the primary mirror and do adjustments. I actually did it the following day after doing a full imaging night. It was a very easy job. You just have 4 screws, Phillips screws, to remove from the tube. You can then pull out the mirror, and then you just unfasten a little bit the screws that are on the clips that hold the primary mirror in place. So does that sound like something like a beginner could do? Absolutely, actually, if it's well documented. But as far as I can tell, it's not documented yet. This is something more that Apertura should add to their manual. How to remove the primary mirror, and not only like do cleaning on it, but also, and actually probably more importantly, how to make sure that the primary mirror isn't having pinched optics. But I wanted to see what the results are out of the box for a full like beginner who just like followed the instructions to collimate the telescope via laser, and then is just using the scope as is. And this is what we get. Now let's look at the corners. Let's first look at the sides. On the left-hand side, we see slight star elongation, but it's actually pretty good, especially on an APS-C size sensor that Apertura was telling me like, yeah, maybe don't use that. But it's actually... And let's go to the top left. Top left is very decent. Like actually round stars. Impressive actually. Okay, let's go to the top of the frame. Slight elongation, but that could be due to the pinched optics. And then on the top right, we have some slight elongation of the stars, but this is like, I'm really pixel peeping there, and it's looking very decent on an APS-C size sensor. Let's just go to the right-hand side of the frame. Again, the stars are slightly elongated, but like nothing really bad. This is actually very, very acceptable. And then bottom right is actually slightly worse. So I feel I have some tilt somewhere that I could be fixing. Maybe at the camera level, I don't know for sure. You can see that stars start even to look kind of like double there, and that could likely be due to the pinched optics as well. Still, I think this is very acceptable. At the bottom of the frame, it actually looks perfectly fine. And then bottom left of the frame is probably the worst part of this system, where the stars almost appear double there again. But this is very much pixel peeping on an APS-C size sensor. You wouldn't be, like as a beginner, likely you wouldn't be using that. Maybe something like the 533 you'd be using would have absolutely no issues besides the pinched optics. So to show you slightly out of focus how the stars look like, you can see they look like those weird double stars. We see some like spur coming out of the star. This is where the triangular shape that we saw on the in-focus stars comes from. And then as I defocus some more, we can see like very obviously pinched optics. And then when we go the other side of focus, we see basically the same thing, like, okay, slightly out of focus, more out of focus, it's just on the other side. I think this all makes sense, and hopefully it's not just astigmatism, but then when I removed the primary mirror, I could see the clips were over-tightened as far as I could tell. So I've done the changes, I haven't been able to test the changes, so this video will still keep going on after my pinched optics change. So make sure to stay tuned, sorry it's a very long video there. But anyway, out of the box, what type of final image are we getting from the night that I spent on the Galaxy M63, the Sunflower Galaxy? Okay, so I had, I believe, 530 frames of 30 seconds each on the Sunflower Galaxy, and this is the result of the stack with just an automated background extraction applied. And let's look at the center of the frame. The stars do look slightly like elongated at the center of the frame when you're pixel peeping, and this is due to the pinched optics. But again, like really, pixel peeping there. The right hand side looks actually very okay for an APS-C size sensor. Top right looks slightly elongated, but very okay. Top left, same story. Bottom left is the worst with more elongated stars, and bottom right is actually very decent as well. Honestly, even with the pinched optics, I think this is a very good stacked result for a single night of imaging from Tokyo with like a very bright moon. Let's see how well it works. First, I did like a quick crop of the image to remove some stacking artifacts. And then I needed to run Blur Exterminator. Blur Exterminator is a paid plugin for the software PixInsight, which I recommend any beginner gets. I know it's going to be a long learning curve, but this is still my single best purchase in the hobby, this piece of software, PixInsight. You'll look at the price, you'll be shocked, but I still recommend buying it. It is the very best piece of equipment that I bought in the hobby to this day, and I bought it like 10 years ago. Now, the plugin called Blur Exterminator costs an additional like $100 on top of this, and this is the impact that it has on the stars, so before and after applying it. And it's particularly shocking or effective on the stars in the corner. Let's look again. Before stars and after. It basically fixes the issues, and Blur Exterminator really changes the game here. And we get a perfectly decent result, even with those pinched optics that are easily user fixable. Now let's keep going. Okay, now my next step was to try basically removing the stars so we can have a better look at the background of the image itself. So let's completely remove the stars and look at the background because, and this has been a problem with pretty much every Newtonian that I've owned. I've only owned for sure two, like the Quattro 150p and the Vixen R200 SS, which is light leaks which translate to like weird shapes and shadows on your images, weird like lights. I mean, it's really bad stuff that you cannot really correct in post. The only thing you can do is add like those butt plugs to your telescope. You can also make sure that your focuser is not leaking light. You can flock the telescope, which means like painting the inside of the telescope with like very dark paint. or like flocking it with flocking paper that will absorb light. There's a lot of things you can do, including adding a kind of a dew shield at the front of the telescope to avoid such reflections. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of guesswork as well. It took me like days and days to get it right with my Skywatcher Quattro 150p Newtonian telescope. And here, it's pretty much perfect. From Tokyo with a lot of stray light. Like out of the box. There might be a slight thing here, although whether it's reflections or simple light pollution, I'm not even sure. It's honestly pretty amazing. I was not expecting it to like handle the lights from Tokyo like that with no issues from like the out of box configuration. So after that I did a quick like dynamic background extraction, which like almost like we have a flat background. It's beautiful, guys. And then I did a quick final processing of the image, and this is a single night from Tokyo with this telescope, basically out of the box, just collimated. We have the nice sunflower galaxy at the center, and we have like I think the biggest detriment to the image on the star shapes is this weird like spikes that come from the mirror clips, and I assume as well from the pinched optics. My assumption is that this will get much better after we fix the pinched optics issue. And that's the out-of-the-box experience. Okay, and finally, after fixing the pinched optics, I had a somewhat clear night last night. Well, not really actually, but just I could see the stars for the early evening, and so I pointed the scope on a very bright star to see how well it would perform now that the pinched optics are fixed with a 30 seconds exposure on that star using my APS-C size sensor that I have here. So again, much bigger sensor than recommended by the manufacturer, just to see the limits of this telescope. And just to be clear as well, this is with a simple collimation that was laser and Cheshire base, exactly as per the instructions in the manual, without doing the in-depth collimation that would require spending time on a star and then adjusting the primary mirror knobs that we have at the back. So let's go inside and look at the result. We're inside. Here are the results. So I pointed the scope at a very bright star. I don't remember which one, but it's one of the brightest in the sky. That gives us a good reference point as to what kind of star spikes we'll be getting from this scope. And of course I'm using an APS-C size sensor, so considerably larger than what is recommended by the manufacturer. There are no flats applied or no calibration whatsoever, so we see the raw output of the telescope. Let's zoom into the central star. The spikes are fairly well controlled. They get very thin, although we get this like fuzziness outside of the spikes, and those are likely caused by the mirror clips. A mirror mask, something that hides the mirror clips from the primary mirror, would help solve that, but it would be at the cost of some light gathering ability. So it would lose maybe around 10-13% of surface area by doing so. I might try to 3D print my own mask for that, but I don't think it's necessary for anyone beginning. One thing I noticed is that if you follow that top star spike, it's not the case for the two others, but you can see its effect even up here. So that is very interesting. I'm wondering whether it's because the spider that holds the secondary mirror is red instead of a matte black to avoid reflections. That could be the case, I don't know for sure. It's only with the top spike. The other spikes, they end fairly early. But in my book, not a big deal at all. Anyway, let's look at the stars themselves. We're already zoomed in. So I'm looking at the top of the frame, and the top of the frame is perfectly fine, like no issue whatsoever there. Actually very impressive, since we're using a larger sensor than recommended. Looking at the top left, there is some slight deformation there, but it is very acceptable, very acceptable actually, better than expected. So that's perfectly fine. Looking at the left hand side, very well controlled stars that do get slightly elongated at the edge, but yeah, no worries there. And let's looking at the bottom left, we see a worse result there. It says it's basically the same as the last image that we saw before I fixed the pinched optics, but it is still better than before. That said, it does tell me that I have either a collimation issue or maybe a tilt issue with my camera, which could happen with a refractor as well if it's a tilt issue. But it means this is something that with time and effort I could improve. But I'm not too worried about that because it's one corner for now. Let's look at the bottom of the frame. The bottom of the frame looks perfectly fine, slightly like deformed star, but like no big deal. And the bottom right is also better than the bottom left, so it seems the bottom left will be the worst of the bunch, and it is indeed slightly deformed, but yeah, not that bad. Let's go on the right hand side of the frame. The right hand side, slightly deformed, misshapen stars, but perfectly acceptable. And then top right of the frame, same story, slightly misshapen stars, but perfectly acceptable in my book. Again, especially because we're using a sensor size that is bigger by far than the recommended sensor size. Like a micro four thirds would be something like maybe this, right? So you'd avoid all of those issues. And these days we also have excellent tools like Blur Exterminator that helps us fix star shapes. So let's have a look at what happens when I run Blur Exterminator on this image. Okay, I've run Blur Exterminator. So at the center the stars are tighter, but I think the corners will be the most interesting to look at. So the bottom left corner, which was the most problematic, it's perfect now. That's Blur Exterminator for you. And top left is perfect. Top right is almost perfect. Bottom left is almost perfect, so on an APS-C size sensor. There you have it. Those are basically the optical results after I spent 5 minutes to fix the pinched optics. Okay, so what are my thoughts on this telescope after using it, getting some images, fixing pinched optics, etc.? Well, my thoughts on this are actually extremely positive because this scope has a lot of things going for it. And that together with the coma corrector, it's still a fairly budget scope. It is light, it is compact, and it doesn't really require any third-party accessories to make it work well. In comparison with this Newt, which is like the same specs basically, but it is actually wider, heavier, larger. I had to replace the spider here that holds the secondary mirror to help with the shapes of the cross on each of the stars. I added a primary mirror mask on this Newtonian, although as you saw, it is not strictly necessary. You saw like basically it would fix the very bright star fuzziness that you saw on the test results of this telescope here. I also added my effectively called butt plug there, which comes by default in a much better shape with this telescope. I changed the focuser that came with the scope after really struggling with the one that came in by default. And I added this 3D printed dew shield, without which I really had some reflection issues within the scope. And that's not all, actually. I also, what is called, flocked the inside of the tube. So if I show you the inside of the tube, it's very dark, and this is because I added flocking paper and also very dark paint, because the default job was simply not enough. And to top it off, the collimation where the scope came by default was off by a huge amount, and if you had been a beginner with just a laser to collimate, you would actually maybe not have even noticed that you were losing half of the brightness of your primary mirror. It was honestly horrible, borderline shameful from Skywatcher to be delivering the scope in that shape. And I've been thinking of replacing the tube itself because it's quite heavy and not great, and also replacing the dovetail, which is one of the worst dovetails that I've seen. So yeah, this telescope basically has good optics, but you need to replace everything to make it work properly. I don't think I exaggerate when I say I spent like maybe 40 hours of work on it to optimize it and make it work. This telescope here, I spent like 5 minutes doing collimation on it. And then when I saw that it had pinched optics, I spent 5 minutes fixing the pinched optics. I didn't do anything else. I didn't have weird reflections in the stacked image that you saw of M63. The star shapes across the APS-C size sensor are, in my opinion, perfectly acceptable, especially since I know I could make them better. It just basically works out of the box with 10 minutes work, compared to 40 hours. Okay, but what about compared to a tiny refractor like that? Wouldn't this be easier for a beginner? Can I recommend this telescope to a complete beginner? Yes, I can. And I will recommend this telescope for a complete beginner. Actually, I think it is better than a small refractor like that, especially if you're in a light polluted area. Let me tell you why. A small refractor like that, if you get a good sample, you're perfectly fine. If you get a sample with poor collimation or pinched optics, then there's pretty much nothing you can do about it a lot of the time. And you might not even notice that it's going wrong. And if you do, you might have really a lot of trouble actually getting a replacement. But if it does work, it really works out of the box. You just connect the camera and you are done. Nothing else to do. Plus, it is small and light, so you do not need a heavyweight mount. But again, this thing here is light as well. It's a carbon tube. And with an AM5, it's perfectly fine. With a ZW AM3, it should also be perfectly fine. So it doesn't change that much from a refractor, in my opinion. A refractor will also have a lower focal length, which means that you are not zooming in to target as much. This is great to get wide field images of nebulae. Awesome. But at the same time, if you're in a light polluted area, you'll see more gradients. In Tokyo, I can tell you, processing images on a very large field or wide field is much harder than processing images that are zoomed in a little bit more. So I need to crop or things like that. This telescope has more than twice the focal length of that one. And it's also around 50% more, actually. I think 60%, 70%, I don't remember. But it's 50 to 70% faster at the same time. So you really get a lot of scope with this. And you get it set up in a way that it is usable from the start. You can do the collimation following the instructions in the manual, and you will learn stuff at the same time. Plus, if there are any optical issues, you'll be able to fix them yourself. And that's it. Afterwards, it's like basically the same amount of work as a normal refractor. You still need to care about the back focus, like most refractors, although this one is an exception due to its Petzval design. You still need to attach an autofocuser if you're going to do autofocus, which I highly recommend if you want to be lazy. You still need to have a way to guide your scope, whether it's by an external guide scope or with this camera with an internal secondary sensor that does the guiding. And you still need something to control the whole equipment. So like an ASI Air, or in my case, StellarMate Pro together with like a mini PC that has Nina installed. So it's overall almost the same. You just have 10 minutes more work to get your Newt ready with that. It is effectively what this should have been in the first place. Skywatcher, I hope you're taking notes. If you've been looking for a nice portable Newtonian telescope, this is what you want. If you've been looking for a refractor that has like around 500, 600 millimeters focal length, maybe reconsider and get this instead. It's probably going to be cheaper too. If you're a beginner in astrophotography and you want a telescope that will last you for a while, that you will learn with, and that is also working very well out of the box, this is it. If you're an advanced astrophotographer that already has like a high focal length telescope and maybe a refractor as well, because that's what you started with, but you want something in the middle as well, this is it. It's just a well thought out package that has good optics. They're basically the same optics, as far as I understand, as the Skywatcher optics. It comes, at least in one of the packages, with the coma corrector that you need. It has a fast speed. It's f3.8. It doesn't have light leaks. It's stylish and beautiful. It has a good spider. The only thing that it likes is a mirror mask. If they added like a primary mirror mask as an option for like $50, I think it would fly off the shelves. And that's it. That's all I have to say. So if you were on the fence about getting this, well, don't be anymore. If you were hesitating between this and this, the Skywatcher Quattro 150p, knowing the Skywatcher Quattro 150p costs like in the US maybe 30% less, 40% less, I don't know, do you value your time? If you do, you go with this. I think overall you are far, far better off getting this. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, in which case, welcome. But more important than all of that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget whenever you can to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.